Hi there, Daniel Kirsch here again to teach you about the presidency. So, hello, and if this is your first video in watching, the content of this course, welcome. And as I say in other videos, my name is Daniel Kirsch, and I've been learning and teaching about the presidency for a very long time. I've been learning about the presidency since I was a kid, and since I've been in higher education, I've taught this course a number of times. It's fair to say at two different coasts, first in Massachusetts and now in Connecticut as well, and now in California. And one thing I've learned about taking this course is that people often think that this course is just going to primarily be about learning about individual presidents, and sometimes it's that, but oftentimes it's, as I think you saw in your introductory American government course, it's about thematic areas of the presidency, and in the American government course it's about Congress and the Supreme Court and other bureaucracy, other political actors too. Well, the thing is about this course, it's really imperative that you see the centrality of the presidency as an actor within American government. And to do that, you really have to explore all the different venues that the presidency has to engage with. And what better way to do that than to separate, each of them into their own individual chapters in a standard textbook. And so that's what's done in the primary textbook for this course that's authored by Lori Cox-Hahn and Diane Heath. So what I want to do today is really just explain to you what the content of the course is. You have the other video, I explained contract grading, so I'm not going to go into that here. I'm going to go into instead what each of these textbooks are, and then try to answer a few other frequently asked questions about the content of the course. So for one thing, there are, as I say, 3 textbooks, and they're all required. The first textbook is the primary one, and that's authored by Lori Cox-Hahn and Diane Heath. I always get the name wrong of the textbook, so that's what I'm covering up. It's I think it's Presidents in the American Presidency, something like that. But it's a very good textbook. I've used it many times, and in fact, at one point, I was able to invite at one point at Sac State, I was able to invite the author, Lori Cox-Hahn, to my classroom and answer questions from students. And that was a great experience, but one that can't be really duplicated all the time. And so I don't plan on inviting her here this time, but if people want to kind of submit questions to her, I'm happy to pass them along. And so anyway, it's a really good book written by these two excellent women scholars, and they have authored a textbook that not only does what I just said a second ago, which is talk about the interaction of the presidency with all these other institutions like Congress, like crafting public policy themselves, like the rest of the executive branch and the bureaucracy, and other kind of primary roles within the executive branch like vice president and first lady. But then there's also the interaction of the presidency with the courts and the media and several other venues and actors. So, but what they also do really well is they talk about presidential research, which is really what you're going to be doing in this course. So, presidential research is the 2 ways that they cover it are the following. One way is, of course, giving you a really good overview and kind of specific view of the literature as it pertains to each one of those areas that I've already been mentioning. But they also have, in chapter 1, I believe, they have a great kind of sweeping overview of what the major work in the field of presidential research in political science has been for the entire kind of latter half of the 20th century, as well as the beginning of the 21st. So it's got a great literature review in and of itself. And in addition to that, It has a really excellent appendix that is not duplicated that I've seen in any other presidential textbook. And it's one of the things that I hope you can take away from this course is the great resource that is presidential libraries. And presidential libraries are often our primary source for, and in the past physically have been our primary source for not only historical research, but kind of new perspectives on historical research. In other words, political science research on the dynamics of any particular presidency. So it began, this kind of idea of presidential libraries really began with presidents having papers that were then saved and collected and often either donated or lent to a library. And it could be, it's usually a university library. Harvard or Yale tended to do a lot of them, university libraries where they were housed there. But that expanded, and presidents and senators and ambassadors often, when they retire or when they die, will donate all of their estate will donate all of their papers, or store somehow agree to house all of their papers, and that means all of their correspondence, all of their kind of personal notes, and all of their as I said, letters, correspondence, but their drafts of their public statements, and that became, all of their entire White House correspondence and all their White House press releases and speeches and everything you can imagine that presidents do or say, whether it's in writing or not in writing, it's commended somehow in writing, is stored in these papers. And it really started with Herbert Hoover, and he turned his presidential library into its own library and museum. And Franklin Roosevelt, in his at Hyde Park that I've visited myself, is excellent because it has a great research room and general kind of library collection based primarily on his White House and his life. But also the museum and the grounds, because Roosevelt was an aristocrat and he was very wealthy, and is a great piece of land, especially in the spring and summer, to get or give a tour. But most presidential libraries and museums, all of them that have taken place since the Roosevelt administration, have been really a fantastic tourist attraction. So the Truman Library is very good, and it's a museum you can walk through, and it has things all about the Fair Deal and the atomic bomb and everything. And it explicitly does not take a position on whether Truman was a good president, which I really admire. And just tries at least to show you how the fact speaks for themselves. So in that sense it's unique, but others that I won't name, I guess, do take a position on whether the president was a good president or not. Most of them think their president was a good president, by the way. And I've been to the George W. Bush Museum and the Nixon Museum and a few others. So in any event, the appendix of the Cox, Hahn, and Heath textbook has a whole, basically, chapter about presidential libraries. But one thing that I'm going to be talking about as your research project goes forward is that I talk about in the contract grading, especially, is the American Presidency Project is this great resource, and it's a really wonderful resource because all of those papers that I was just talking about that are physically stored in all these presidential libraries museum are actually now online, and you can search for them in one place, not on Google, and don't do that. But you can find Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, all the way back to George Washington, actually. It's amazing the amount of papers you can find. I think everything is there going back to George Washington from every president. And so all of their speeches, all of their letters, all of their press releases, all of their kind of public appearances that have been recorded are all there. And so it really allows for a very comprehensive overview of what that president has done or in the past you can imagine them have been involved in. You can study it. So So that's a good resource, and they I think they allude to it at least in the textbook. But the textbook was published in 2017, so there is some need for some supplementary material that I'll definitely be providing. So in all the modules that I talked about in the contract grading video, the first module will of course be get to know you and the first chapter and the first couple of chapters, and I try to group them institutionally. So we're going to talk about the presidency, Congress, and the Supreme Court first. But beyond that, there's other modules that we'll get into when we get into them. But the first paper will be, encompassing material about those institutions, and the first lectures will be as well. And they're going to be based primarily in material from that textbook, but I will also provide some additional videos and articles for you to read. And you'll basically be self-paced. You can look at this stuff along with your group that you'll be assigned to, and you'll be answering questions that I pose to you as well. The other two textbooks are kind of fun. The first one is by Paul Buell and Sabrina Jones. It's FDR and the New Deal for Beginners by a publisher called Writers and Readers, a kind of independent publisher. It's a great little book. Sabrina Jones is a cartoonist, and Paul Buell is now I guess he's a comic book writer. Very nice guy. Also met him. But he is a retired historian, used to be at Brown University, but he's now primarily in his retirement, he's become a comic book writer of dozens, maybe more than 100, comic books that are historical in nature, often from a progressive standpoint, but it's just packed with information. It's a great, it's not for children. It's just for beginners. It's people who have not been introduced to this material before, and it's just a fun packaging. It's a kind of a good way to get introduced to the chronology, the story, the narrative of the New Deal. And FDR himself has an interesting backstory, but that's kind of secondary to the content of the book. The book is just, it's a thin little book. It's great. I actually only have the e-copy, which you can get to, but I'm thinking of getting the physical copy because I think that's easier to read. On Amazon, you can get it pretty cheaply and quickly. Of course, the Kindle is like $10, but I recommend really getting the physical copy because the Amazon one, you can't really zoom in well on a Kindle. But just get the physical copy. Do yourself a favor. You can also get it, I think, through the Sacramento Public Library if you want. So I would do that. Then there's so it's a good book, and module 2 will be mostly where we talk about this book and the Margaret Kimberly book. Margaret Kimberly is a journalist. She's not a political scientist like Han and Heath are, and Paul Buell, a historian, but Margaret Kimberly is a journalist, and she wrote a book, a very, very interesting book that I will give you some interviews from to listen to and watch. She normally is an editor of an online publication called Black Agenda Report, and she's decidedly a kind of, I'll just say she kind of proclaims herself a left-wing activist, and she votes for the Green Party and that kind of thing. So she really doesn't have an allegiance to either the Republican or the Democratic Party, and she really is very, she doesn't hold back in her criticisms of any president, because the book is called, as I think I said, Prejudential, maybe I didn't, but Black America and the Presidents. And I've read a lot of presidency books, okay, a lot. And they all have this kind of individual lives of the presidents and their presidency kind of format. She has decided to exclusively focus on the interaction of that president, of every president, and their treatment and their attitudes and their behavior towards the black population in the United States. And this is all the way through slavery, of course, to segregation and sharecropping, to the civil rights movement, and systematic, structural, persistent racism, right? And all of these different things that could have been done that weren't done. What I guess my main criticism of Kimberly, I really admire the book, and I actually had a very good time reading it, and I actually listened to it as well. Like, you It's only a 6-hour read on audible.com if you want to just listen to it that way. And then the author actually is the one who reads the whole book. But what I find a little bit wanting is a little bit of, not false equivalency, I don't want that, but a little bit more scholarly even-handedness, because I do think she's making an argument, and it is a persuasive one. But I find that, in going into presidents like James Garfield and William Henry Harrison, who had very short presidencies, she goes out of her way to kind of say that they had negative attitudes towards people of color, or they didn't do anything, or they somehow were indicted for a lack of attention to any issue, or if they said positive things but then didn't do as much as they said they wanted to do. I just find it's a little bit reaching in some of those places. But for the most part, none of what she says is untrue at all. It's just sort of the argument she's making that she has to sort of stretch a little bit, and which is fine. It's her prerogative as an author and researcher, and the evidence as she sees it presented. But we can interpret the information she presents in our own way, and the information is neglected often in history, and so it does a great service because it actually does present these arguments in a focused way that really has no parallel that I can see in any historical or presidential research. So it's extremely laudable, and so I'm very interested. And a lot of the verve that she applies to the storytelling in the book, that's all true, is also extremely pleasant, and pleasant's the wrong word, but really piques your interest, and so really causes you to keep reading. So in that way, I hope that we can get into it and discuss some of it in the course. So the Buell and the Kimberly are kind of some added, hopefully, spice to the course that otherwise might be in some people's minds dry, but I think having comic books and some kind of somewhat vitriolic attacks on every single president should add some maybe controversy that we could use to fuel interesting conversations in the course. So that's kind of the content of the course, and besides that, I hope you feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions you want. But I'll be explaining I'll be releasing the first assignments very soon, and otherwise, feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have. You can always make an appointment with me, and obviously you should on Calendly, and get in touch with me at my phone number on the syllabus or my email address. And I look forward to talking with you. But that's essentially the content of the course, is or at least an overview of the content of the course. And the lecture videos that follow this will have more on what's actually in these textbooks. So with that, I look forward to working with you this semester.